are merging together.
I'm going to open it up. Um, oh, Pete's here. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Hi, Maddie.
Hey,
Hi,
how's it
Pete.
going?
Yeah, happy Friday, everyone. Um, Maddie and Mike, I gave Morgan a heads up, but I have already had some technical difficulty this morning, so I am making you both co-hosts just in case. One of those
Got it.
days, one of those Friday days. So we are good to go. Let me just share my screen and we can get started as everyone rolls in here. You guys just give me that big thumbs up. Let me know that you can see what
Yeah,
is
we can
up
see it.
on there. Perfect. All right. Bear with me. Now I'm looking for another screen. It doesn't want to show me. All right. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. We are pleased to have Morgan Tate with us from Breakwater M&A. So I'll just wait a moment and do his intro in a moment. But we're very excited to have him with us today. If you're new to Village Wealth, my name is Liz McCrae. I'm a co-founder here, and you are joining us for our Friday speaker series. Welcome. Our mission at Village Wealth is that the path to business ownership through acquisition is complex. We all know this. You're here for this webinar. Village Wealth is a deal management platform and tech-enabled advisory service built to change that. We surround motivated operators and career professionals with the infrastructure, guidance, and tools to go from wanting to own a business to actually owning one. What we've built is a tech advisory service and platform that work together. Our advisory support team works in the software with our clients to help them source deals and get through negotiations. It's a high-touch service that we walk our clients through each stage of the deal, one step at a time. Our deal management platform has AI evaluation tools and over 60,000 listings that are sent out daily and match to your search criteria. We have a ton of ETA education in the platform, and as you may have found on our YouTube channel, feel free to check that out. We have debt advisory program and SBA pre-qualification and application features in the platform. Whether you're in Canada or the US, we can help support you on the debt side. Our community, which you're experiencing a bit of here today, as well as their search services. So we are hired also from the buy side community to help them search and find the deal that's right for them. And you can access our team through Village Wealth. Today you're joining us for our speaker series. This morning, some of our team just got open office hours where we provide group coaching every Friday morning and invite guests as well to those sessions. You can access a free trial of Village Wealth by visiting villagewealth.com and click just get started, and it'll walk you through a free 2-week trial. And then our team and Mike, who is here today as well, he's a real person. He is available to chat with anyone who has questions about our services or how the platform works. So I'd welcome everyone to jump in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from, what lens you are taking. I know from Morgan's perspective, it's always nice to know who's in the audience and who's listening in today. I'll do a brief intro of Morgan. And this session today is a discussion. So we don't have a presentation today. Sometimes we do, but today we're just focused on the discussion around the debate between buyers and sellers and what perspective each party is coming from. So we invite your questions and your comments in the chat. We'll be moderating the Q&A, but don't hold back. You can, put your comments in as we go, or feel free to raise your hand as well. All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will jump into things. So again, Morgan Tate, if you're new to hearing about who Morgan is, Morgan is an M&A advisor, and we first met, I don't know what, 4 or 5 years ago, Morgan?
Yeah, I think so. At the IBBA conference, I think we were saying.
Yeah, it was an IBBA conference. I think it was the Denver one. And Morgan was earlier in his journey. He is a partner of Chinook M&A in British Columbia. And we first met when you were building a software platform for them called Deal Builder, where you were trying to make it easy for business owners to get their SIMs and documents and connection. And it was a platform. It was fantastic, and it pivoted towards supporting brokers. And now you are full on in the M&A game and away from the software game a little bit to a degree. I know you're still dabbling. And Morgan also has a great newsletter and stream on fitness and health for entrepreneurs on the mental health side of things. So great person to follow on a number of levels. But Morgan, I know I probably missed a few details in there. Do you want to fill in the gaps and finish your intro?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Liz. It's good to see everybody. So, yeah, built Deal Builder, which eventually became a software as a service platform for business brokers to like power NDAs through sharing data rooms. We ultimately sold that business to a company called Deal Studio, which is a CRM for business brokers. And I really, at the same time, I'd already always done deals. So while building Deal Builder, I was still doing some M&A work with Chinook during that time. And then as AI became more prevalent and saw the applications, how it could be applied in our work as M&A advisors, that's where the more recent work I've been doing has been building basically our Breakwater company, which is merging with Chinook as well, is focused on building AI first M&A brokerage. So what does that actually mean is automating everything from sim creation, data rooms, building kind of automations around buyer questions, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I can kind of share a little bit today and my perspective on that. So been building in the space for a very long time and done lots of work with buyers as well. So excited to share what I can and answer questions today as well.
Thanks, Morgan. And one of the reasons I wanted to invite Morgan on today was because he's seen deals from so many different perspectives, and he's seen Main Street deals and he's seen mid-market deals, and you really have a refreshing and realistic view on the industry and the space, Morgan. And I think the other thing that Morgan brings is he's involved in BBHQ, which is a business broker community. So he talks to a tremendous amount of business brokers that bring, their lens to their community that we have. We've got our buy side community. Morgan's got the sell side community. And so he hears a lot of things in the space, but your perspective of everything is very realistic and honest, which is very refreshing. So thank you for being here.
I speak to about 100 brokers a week on a webinar. So if you have beef with certain things about brokers, you can share them here and I can be the messenger as well. So I'm sure nobody has any problems with any business brokers. Everybody is fine and great. So there might not be much feedback I can take to the group, but I'm happy to take the few comments there are.
The very few. Yes, I know. And
Yeah.
and we are here also from our side because we know that brokers have their frustrations with
Hmm.
buyers. So we are here
Yes.
today to cut through some of those frustrations and share some perspectives on both sides. And as many of you guys know, I am a former business broker, so I do have some sympathy for the brokers sometimes as well. And so yeah, so let's kick it off, Morgan. We most of the buyers know what our frustrations are, and we'll get to those in a moment. But what are some of the frustrations that the brokers have that maybe some buyers aren't as aware of?
Yeah, I think what often happens, if I was going to step back like one layer, and this is not absolutely true, but the perception that a lot of buyers give off is that they think that they're like the only participant in the deal. And what I think a lot of buyers maybe aren't don't see is that on even like smaller deals, we may get 100 NDAs signed from buyers of all different ranges of preparedness, of legitimacy, of profiles that are good or not. I was talking to a broker, like, and in the States, I think it's gotten even crazier where they're getting 200, 300, 400, sometimes 1,000
Wow.
NDAs on a deal. There was one broker in particular who was a big buyer following, which obviously makes it very hard to be responsive and things and especially when there are kind of lazy questions that are asked. So I think the most common challenge that we face as brokers is that the upside of having a unqualified buyer, get through your process. So, like, for example, like the downside of not of having a good buyer not be able to access the data room and put an offer in is actually not as bad as having an unqualified or even worse than that, like a nefarious buyer get through the process and disrupt the relationship with the seller. Because ultimately, our seller can get so frustrated with us, you could lose the engagement. So there's like this kind of,
Gatekeeping them.
yeah, asymmetric downside of giving full access to every single buyer, which I think is the most common beef. And I can talk about ways that you can, as a buyer, make sure that you're getting access, that you're coming prepared, that you understand what's going on. But I think that's something that's often missed is that we're getting this inundated, especially now because like buying a business is trendy with all this buyer demand. With, I, for example, just had a buyer where we had to, with the seller, we had to terminate the deal in diligence. It was a few weeks out from closing because the buyer was such a nightmare to deal with. And fortunately, it didn't kill the relationship with those seller. I have a good relationship with them, but it could have. And now we're back to the drawing board to sell that business. And it was definitely one of those like buyers who, like the language they were using, they were like an ETA buyer. And it's like, they just weren't prepared. They didn't have the money in place. They were kind of misleading and or lying about things in the process. So having those people get down the road can ultimately kill your engagement,
So
which is a big problem.
So that comes down to sometimes like just the internal process of the brokerage itself and your
Hmm.
vetting and qualification
Yeah.
process. Maybe walk us through what your process is and us understanding that not all processes are the same. This is your process. So yeah, walk us through what your expectations are.
Yeah. So our philosophy is that if we have a buyer that fits the profile of the deal, we're removing as many barriers as possible and making it extremely clear what the steps are to be able to put an offer in to ultimately buy the business. Like we want, like our dream outcome is have a deal close as quickly as possible. Like that is the goal of the seller. It's the goal of the buyer if it's a great fit. Our process in terms of how buyers come through our system is an NDA and a profile. The profile is important because it allows us to have some more context of like we ask for a short background and we might have some questions that are related to that deal. For example, how much cash do you have available to purchase a business? If it's more of a private equity fund, we'll ask, are you a search fund, like a funded search fund with committed capital, or are you going to have to raise money? What's your investment committee look like if there is one? We'll like ask these questions on a deal so we know who is coming in because you'd be surprised. We have a lot of buyers who will inquire on like maybe a $20 million transaction. They have 100 grand. And it's like, well, in what world are you going to be able to buy this business, even if you raise money from investors? And we don't know who these investors are, and they don't either. But so that's always a challenge. But in terms of our process, we get that profile, we get the NDA, and then once we've granted access, that buyer is going to get access to a 20 to 30-minute video interview we do with the seller. They're going to get access to a full financial workbook and we'll try and break it down even to customer concentration, to the income statement and balance sheet for up to 5 years, as many years as we can, and the current year to date, with all of our EBITDA normalizations broken down, and revenue analysis and a bunch of other things. And then they're also going to get a full SIM. And then they also get access to supporting financials, so like the source financials, the accountant prepared financials, and other things. So they're getting a lot of material, probably a lot more than most brokers provide. And
Yeah, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, and
And
the reason why is because we want the qualified buyers. We know they're going to ask for it anyways. But it's also why we don't, if you just sign an NDA with us, we don't just grant access because there's a lot that we're giving up in exchange as well.
yeah. So just to paraphrase that again, so you want to see that they're providing you their financial capacity information, their funding model. Uh, and then do you speak with them when they before they you release any information, or do you just release that full package, or is there like staging? And yeah, I know I have another follow-up question after that.
Yeah, usually we will, if the questions are answered, and like we usually will ask for like a LinkedIn, like we can see that they're, a real person, what have you. We'll usually just release without having to do a phone call. We just don't really have the time to do that for everyone. We will
Mhm.
ask follow-up questions often to those that don't really fill it out, or there's some like red flags. And we're working on like an AI review system that will like basically that'll flag certain things for further questions or if it looks good. And then in terms of like once they've gotten into our data room, that preliminary view, we'll do a buyer interview as the next step in our process. And
Okay.
then, yeah, that'll be like right after they've been able to review the materials.
Okay, sounds good. And then when do you allow that meeting with the seller?
We will do that buyer interview, and the action item after the buyer interview is to get like a term sheet. So a high level, whether it's a expression of interest or, like a very simple one page, roughly this is the valuation range that we're going to provide. I'm going to adjust the valuation range that it has to be within 10% of like where they're going to ultimately land. So it's not like it could be 1 million to 2 million. It's not really helpful to anybody. Um, and then deal structure to a high level. So is it going to be, are you wanting 50% seller financing? Well, it's better to know now than,
Yeah,
get
and
really
they
down
were
the
too far
process.
apart. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's been really helpful. Training and transition expectations, closing date, that's a big one. Like we sometimes will have, searchers that are like, "Oh, I really love the business, but I can't close till the end of the year because of my job or whatever, or I'm moving," and it might just not work timing wise. So we get that term sheet prior to the buyer seller meeting. And the common pushback I get is, "Oh, well, how am I supposed to put in like a valuation range with if I haven't had full due diligence or I haven't spoken to the seller?" And it's really not that hard, to be honest, like with the materials that we provide to give like a general high level. It's mostly to avoid wasting the seller's time and the buyer's
Yeah.
time and
Well,
do
and
us
that's a
our
trigger for you as to how knowledgeable and sophisticated the purchaser is.
yeah, exactly. Like it should be it shouldn't be crazy. And we do provide a lot. Like it definitely is. There's enough there. Really what due diligence should be is confirmatory at that point. And for the actual letter of intent, we give like full data room access, bearing like maybe a few details that are more sensitive to
Yeah.
underwrite and put the LOI together.
Yeah, we've seen, in our advisory services, we've certainly seen the packages that you guys put together, and they're very contrasted to a lot of the packages that we've seen with from quite a number of other M&A firms. So kudos to you guys. You are making the process easier. I can see Heather nodding here too. I know she's seen your packages too. So we appreciate you. Thank you. If you could, yeah, train the rest of your brokers in your community to have this level of process, that would be great. And I know you guys are working on it. And so what is one of the biggest things that you notice from the buyers that are going through these stage gates with you? Where are they dropping off? What could they be doing better to get through this process?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes it's a hesitancy to take like the next step, and then it's kind of like we're like chasing a little bit. And sometimes we don't have the time to chase, so they just kind of get lost. I think getting a quick no, like I really appreciate the buyers that are like kind of a quick no, give a short, they don't have to really even get into the weeds of why, but it's useful for us. Um, yeah, I think that there's this kind of interesting balance where we'll have I've had that run into this several times where I think buyers think it's maybe like a broker trick to be like, hey, we got other buyers that are interested, but I try and not use that language so that it doesn't like boy who cried wolf, but sometimes that is true. And then they wait too long and then they
Sometimes
get
it's true, or like you don't say it if it's not true.
Yeah, I don't say it if it's not true. I will say that, because again, like I don't want to be like, oh, you need to get an offer in because we're expecting an offer by Friday, and then it comes Monday and we haven't gotten anything.
Yeah. Our
Um,
buyers never know whether that's serious or not. Like that comes up in discussion in our open office hours a lot is like they're
yeah,
saying there's other offers. They're saying like, are there? Do we take them seriously? And
and it's
you
tough
never
because it's
know.
not as regulated as like real estate and others where I'm not a real estate agent, but from my understanding, there's like certain language you can use and not use, and that you don't have that, so you never fully know. I think that the problem is like you can ignore that, but don't get upset when it goes under offer and you miss
Yeah.
because you didn't stay to the timelines.
Yeah.
We're adjusting our process to have a expiry on the data room. So rather than having bid deadlines, it's like too hard on the main street and lower middle market to have like, hey, we need bids in by this date.
Hmm.
Oftentimes there's just like not enough sophisticated buyers. Like you can do that with investment banking deals and others. But with our kind of process, it doesn't really work. So what we've changed to be like you get a week after you get accepted, like NDA, you'll have an auto expire at the end of the week, unless you take like that next step. So there's kind of like these stage gates, like you said, Liz, in our system, and we're having like gonna have a buyer facing software that makes it really easy to do this. But it's like, okay, you got to book your meeting with our team in
Hmm.
that week. Otherwise, you're going to lose access to the data room. And then that extends it for a few more days to put a term sheet together.
Oh, okay.
And it's kind of like this self set deadlines and expiry. And we're pretty excited about that because I think it gives everybody kind of a clear timeline of how the process is moving. And those timelines might move up if someone goes, okay, I'm ready to put in an offer.
Yeah. And that's where like buyers can get confused between, which broker has which expectations of timelines and the differences. But like you guys are very organized and very tech enabled and you have a fantastic team. What about the brokerages that don't, but they still have, a great deal and you're one of those 300 buyers that are not getting through. What is your take on what's happening with other brokerages out there and how they're filtering through buyers? Like that, it's one of our biggest frustrations we hear is I can't get through to the broker,
Mhm.
and the broker's not responding.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. And the bar is really low. What I do, like, I can't, like, I just don't really handle is if we have like a public listing and you haven't signed an NDA or haven't submitted an inquiry on like businesses for sale or business by sale, and you just call, it's probably like the worst possible way to try and like get like further information is just like to
Okay.
call. We don't have your contact information. Like we have all these automations built around the inquiries. Like our firm's a little bit different. But I find out there is like a groups of buyers that just do that. They like want to call and they're like, "Hey, I'm looking at your listing," and they ask all these like detailed questions, and I don't even know what listing they're talking about because we have like our firm we're trying to get to 20 per broker at any given time. So it's like
A lot.
it's hard to know exactly, and I think sometimes they forget like we have a one to many relationship with buyers. So there's like a lot
Hmm.
of different buyers, and we have a lot of different deals, whereas they have like a one-to-one with that deal with us. And so I think you kind of have to adopt to the broker's process, as frustrating as that may sound, and some are better than others. And then you can probably just write off certain brokers if you have a really bad experience and just be like, it's going to be really hard to do deals with them unless you adopt to their process. So you make the inquiry or you make that follow-up call, you try and get through. And if it's pretty clear that you can't, just you're gonna have to work with people like yourselves to see if you guys can help them get through or find deals. But typically, what I would recommend is what I really like with, as I've worked on bigger deals with private equity groups, is they ask what the process is. So they're like, is there a bid deadline? How are you handling? Is there EOIs and then management meetings? Like they ask because every broker has a slightly different. And so I'm kind of taking out the really bad ones. So let's just ignore like the bottom tier of brokers that are just completely unresponsive or unreasonable. For the ones that are good, I would say it goes a long way to like ask and show that you're prepared. Having like a one pager of like, oh, this is how much like with a proof of funds of some nature, with your background and profile is really nice. It makes you stand out.
Can I
Yeah.
add on to that question a little? We get a lot about folks who are encountering listings that are for sale by real estate brokers who,
Hmm.
have some commercial knowledge or don't. It's a very different process. They have very different information. It's very different working with them. Do you have any advice for the real estate brokers who are selling commercial? How
Yeah,
to
it's
navigate?
like I've done some deals with commercial brokers on the other side, like working with buyers, because it's more common to do like that co-brokering type arrangement. I think some of the most hidden gem deals can sometimes be represented by a commercial real estate agent because they could be underpriced, oftentimes more than they're overpriced. Sometimes they're way overpriced, but oftentimes I find a lot of them leave a lot of money on the table for their clients,
Mhm.
which is, you know, we live in a free market, so you don't have to be charitable and bring your offer up. But like because they don't know how to calculate EBITDA, they've just taken net income and that's their
Yeah.
EBITDA. And but they forget that the owner is taking like 500K a year in T4 salary and they haven't added that back and they're like running like a small business. So it just like creates this like, oh, even if I hired a GM, like the EBITDA is going to be way higher than where it is now. So not even like adjusted EBITDA, like manipulation, it's just straight cash flow. So I think that that's interesting, but you have to, and then it's a similar thing where I find with real estate lawyers as well, like that's the worst to deal with is when a seller's hired their like real estate lawyer who's never done really business transactions. They want their offers to be legally binding purchase agreements because that's what they do. They write like legally binding offers on real estate. They don't write LOIs
Mhm.
generally
Yeah, always with the deposit too.
with a deposit. So that's its own obstacle and challenge. And usually they don't have a very good data room.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it is tough because I've had lawyers that have just killed deals because the lawyer demanded a non-refundable deposit and a legally binding offer without providing any due diligence at all. And it's like there's a lot more moving parts than real estate.
Yeah. And I would add on to that too, Maddie. I would say my advice to buyers who are dealing with real estate agents is go in eyes wide open with what you potentially could be walking into. Like lack of data room, lack of, the adjusted normalizations, um, lack of sophisticated legal, which is going to increase your legal fees. And so like just going in knowing kind of where the landmines are so that you know how to navigate around them. And usually it's going to take longer and it could be more painful, but at the end of the day, you could get that like golden nugget deal that, Morgan was saying. There are some hidden gems in there. We've seen it too. But it certainly did increase legal costs for the client that we were working with on that mandate. But Morgan, I want to touch on AI and how AI is changing things for both parties. Because you and I jumped on earlier and we're chatting a bit about it. And then I know you have recently had a deal die and you have some frustrations, and I want to give you some space to air your frustrations, which could be some good tips for people to avoid in their own journeys. But you know, coming back to the AI conversation is how have you seen the use of AI either add to the process and improve it for both buyer or seller or create new frustrations? Where are you at?
Yeah, the biggest benefit, I'll start with the good and I'll get into the bad and ugly. But the good is buyers are way more educated than they were in the past in terms of process, putting LOIs, like what they have someone they can ask. So it cuts down on those questions. Same with our sellers. Our sellers are way more prepped when they come and meet with us about valuation expectations, how the process works. They've spent a bit more time selecting the right advisor, hopefully, which is creating lots of opportunities. The biggest downside I found is actually it's slowing deals down rather than speeding them up.
Really?
Yeah, so like I will find buyers will put together this an LOI with AI that is like full of crazy terms and a bunch of like basically AI slop and is way overkill for the size of the deal, which can be overcome. But then what ends up happening is like, we present that to the seller then goes into AI and gets a markup version of that, and then it's more copy and paste AI, like all these different things. And then it goes to the buyer and then they edit it and they're not using the same conversation, so there's no memory of the edit. So they're like re-editing
Oh,
the same thing. Like it's basically going back and like reverting back to the original. I just had these buyers doing this buyer and seller where the seller just kept like rerunning it through AI. And we kept like, I'm like, no, we resolved that like three edits ago. And now your
yeah,
AI is bringing it back in. So that is a new challenge that I'm, working through. And so now it's kind of like, okay, well, now we just got to get on a call and like talk through these things, I guess.
yeah,
So that is an interesting challenge. And I'm finding that, that perhaps the advice, because AI is obviously going to be in the interest of the asker. So it's like always going to ask for more diligence information, like more and more and more. And so we're not actually getting forward progress. We're just kind of like treading water. And I had this experience with this buyer where it like was like pulling teeth to get an offer in. And just like terminology and just and like was saying stuff, but they didn't understand what they were asking because they're not educated on it. They're just like taking what AI is saying. And then
mhm.
people are hiding behind it. So I call it out all the time now. I'm like, okay, this looks like a series of AI questions. So let's just, can you tell me what you actually are asking? And so
I
that's
saw
been
you.
getting pretty frustrating.
I saw you had a post. You were ranting one day on LinkedIn
Yeah.
about buyers' use of AI and how you can tell, and you're just calling it out, which I think is good. It's good.
Yeah, because it's just like, it just doesn't make any sense. Or it does, but it like I know for a fact you did not read this, you copy and pasted it, and you could not tell me on a phone conversation what this actually means. And so that's been a new challenge.
Yeah, and I think like the AI conversation comes back to like AI is still not replacing human advisory and human support and
Hmm.
that judgment that comes from experience. And when you're using AI, it's there to please too, but it doesn't, if you still don't know what you don't know, you just can't not, ask other people who have experience in the space. It's so valuable. And these are very expensive mistakes that could be made if you're exclusively relying on AI.
Yeah, I had a deal that was this was like really early, more early AI, so it was a lot worse because this was like 12 months ago or whatever it was. Maybe it was like 16 months ago.
So long ago.
And the client, who was a boomer, who was using AI, but he was like kind of hiding behind it, kept talking about his tax advisor. His tax advisor was advising this, and the tax impact would be this, and it just didn't seem right. And I kept being like, I don't know who he's talking to. And then eventually had a different advisor come in, and I kind of put two and two together. His tax advisor was really just AI, and AI was wrong. And it was like, I'm like, why are you letting this make like a decision that's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars? Just like spend some money on an accountant that knows what they're talking about. Just interesting. It's like how much trust people have, and then they won't trust a human. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, these are complex and it doesn't have the
Hmm.
context either. And yeah, especially on tax consequences. Ah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big
that's
one.
scary. That's a big one. So tell us more about what happened in your recent deal where it fell apart.
Yeah, so we it's like a small e-commerce kind of company, and had a buyer who was interested, had kind of some experience in marketing, seemed like a pretty good, fit. Set up meetings with the owners. We just kind of like kept asking these circular questions around, you know, some things, provided quite a bit of information to be able to put a letter of intent together. Helped draft the letter of intent. We kept going back and forth, like the negotiation. It was kind of like you could almost, I could see the writing on the wall, and I almost
Mhm.
just said like, "Hey, I don't think this is a good fit." Just based
Mhm.
off, I could tell they like the likelihood of closing seems really low. Eventually got the LOI to be, signed, and just throughout the whole process, the buyer kept saying like things like, "Oh yeah, this is like the price for now." I'm like, "No, no, this should be the price unless something drastically changes. Like we're not just going to renegotiate this later in the process." Sure enough, in the process, tried to like change the amount of inventory that was included, kept kicking back closing, was not hiring lawyers to get things done, like was telling their lawyer not to start work because they weren't done due
Mhm.
diligence yet. and was just being very difficult and was hard to tell how much money they had. We're saying like, oh, the BDC has been, delaying the process. I talked to my contacts at the BDC who I know very well, and they're like, well, that buyer reached out like to set up a meeting on a weekend. We're not open on the weekends, and then we haven't heard from them again. So it was like, okay, well, really the delay is you. You haven't done anything.
Yeah.
And so after, extension, kept changing things. We had set firm deadlines to have a draft of the purchase agreement. We're like 2 months past the proposed original closing date.
Yeah.
Did not hit that, and then we just killed the deal. And we're just like, even if this person was able to close, they did not want to sell that business. They have staff that this person would be interacting with. There was just like no chance they would be successful. They kept changing their structure. At one point, they were going to move to Vancouver Island to run the business, and they didn't. And then they were going to move the
Mhm.
manufacturing to Vancouver, and then they weren't. And then they wanted them involved for a really long time. They just had showed no confidence of doing anything. And
Anything.
so that's really what ultimately kind of killed it at the end of the day.
So it sounds like there might not have been too many other buyers for the opportunity.
We've had a few other that have looked at it. It is a smaller deal. There is some like
Mhm.
challenges with it, but we didn't really have that competitive. So they did have a little
Yeah.
bit of that going on. Um, but yeah, it was just like it's just kind of like one of those things where I think sometimes buyers think that they have all the leverage, but at the end of the day, the seller can just keep running the business. Like they didn't
Yeah.
have to sell.
They'll just decide not to sell
Yeah,
if you make it too painful and too complicated.
totally.
Um,
Yeah.
I want to come back to something that you said around the legal that they kept instructing their lawyer not to start the work because like in our world we do talk about once you get under exclusivity you get and maybe this is contrasted to the amount of information that you guys are providing upfront. You are providing more than the average broker. And so, in a lot of other situations, the buyer does not have the breadth of information that you guys provide. And so, a lot of our conversations were like, you get under exclusivity, like, get a look at everything else before you engage your lawyer, because you're not going to start your definitive purchase agreement until you have gotten through some more of the due diligence. So, in some situations, we're instructing them to not engage the lawyer because now they're getting under the hood and now they're verifying and that sort of thing is, you know, what's your opinion on that? When does the buyer bring in the lawyer?
I think that what I would do instead is have a plan for due diligence that you share with the broker and the seller.
Mm,
And so I think it's an underutilized thing. What I'm going to start doing is having weekly meetings with buyer and seller and having like a ch closing checklist. And we're going to have a team member that's going to guide, like keep everybody accountable for what
hmm
they're going to do.
hmm
And some of those things will be like, okay, what are the like I'm doing a deal actually that's closing in Calgary at the end of the month. I think we're signing the purchase agreement today. But I thought the seller was going to be really difficult to get information from. I find that when sellers are motivated and they have high confidence in the buyer, they can get stuff done. Like if they've built a business worth selling, they've worked hard in their lives to get to where they are, and they usually can figure it out or pay somebody to figure out like getting a big diligence list. Where I find sellers don't want to put in the work is when they have low confidence in the buyer's ability to close. And so I hear this all the time. This is just from the seller's perspective. If they are thinking that a buyer is not legit, and they're not going to close anyways, like why spend all this work? Why get my accountant and lawyer to spend all this money on my dime and this buyer's not even going to close? And what happens if it doesn't?
hmm
Now my staff, it's like that whole common problem of like, do I tell my key staff members or introduce them to the buyer? But what happens if the buyer doesn't close? Now it's like confusing. And so what I think you can overcome that, and the reason why I mentioned this example in Calgary is that that owner got all of the diligence stuff in like 2 days that we needed. But what I did was the buyers had sent this like laundry list of diligence items. It was like really overwhelming. And I said, okay, if we will work through these, but can you just tell me the top like priority one things to get immediately?
hmm
And they whittled it down to like 5 things, 6 things. Those
Nice.
were provided within like
Priority.
two
Yeah.
days. And then it's like, okay, well, we got the big stuff out of the way. Now there's confidence for the lawyers to like begin the work on the draft. And if you can
hmm
stage gate the unlock, then the seller's going to feel more confident as well. So I would say like yeah, you don't want to spend unnecessary money. It's why I tell buyers, you don't really need your lawyer to draft an LOI because, if it doesn't go through, you've kind of wasted some money. Um, what I would do though is what are those top items that if you haven't received it, like the detail that we usually provide, get those first items, and then that unlocks, and you communicate that closely with
Mhm.
the seller, being like, okay, we'll have a draft of the purchase agreement by this date, but it's conditional on getting this, these exact things
Getting
for our
these
diligence.
pieces. Yeah.
And then just communicating that as a plan, and hopefully the broker can help facilitate that because that's really our role
Yeah.
in the diligence period.
100%. Yeah, we've had like buyers that are working with us that'll start those weekly meetings with the sellers once they're in due diligence. They're meeting weekly for, even if it's just lunch to build the relationship. But you mentioned confidence to close. And so, for first-time buyers that maybe don't know what that means and how to convey that confidence, like what do you like to see from a buyer, um, when things like post LOI that are demonstrating to the seller along the way that I have confidence to close? What are those triggers for you?
Yeah, I think having a strong, like the plan really helps. Confidence close, like the funding, like communicating how the funding is going to work. Like a lot of sellers, it's kind of like a black box of terms of like, can this buyer afford it? Especially on the
Mhm.
Main Street level, like how are they going to do this? I think demonstrating like knowledge about the industry or space, like that is actually an underrated one that sellers talk to me all the time. They're like, in the buyer seller meeting, like, oh, they're going to buy an automotive repair shop, but they don't even know what like a transmission is. And it's like, how are they going to run this thing or work with my staff? And
Mhm.
so like sharing some knowledge, having a plan in place, like being just like clear communication. I think a lot of buyers hold their cards to their chest unnecessarily. Like you don't need to be that. You should be collaborative, like working with the seller and turning it as quickly from an adversarial negotiation into a collaboration. Now you've agreed on terms. Now we're working together to get the deal closed. And that's like the most likely the highest closing rate has been any deal where I can kind of tell you now, after doing this for 7 years, when a buyer and seller are starting to work together, I'm like, okay, this deal's going to close. Even if like huge stuff comes up because they've
Mhm.
built that, we call it like my colleague Mike calls it the goodwill of the deal. It's not the goodwill that's like the branding, trademarks, and what have you. It's the goodwill of the relationship between the buyer and seller in diligence that helps get overcome those. And every single deal has it, like something comes up every single time.
What about like and I'm sure this never happens with you guys, but one of the frustrations that we hear is when the broker gets in between building that goodwill in the relationship between the buyer and the seller, and the broker is gating the deal too much that it restricts that relationship from being built.
Yeah, I think you just kind of in those scenarios, like anything else, you almost have to kill them with kindness a little bit, like build the relationship enough with the broker and just
Mm.
say like, hey, this is the way I'm going. Like I'm not gonna cut you out of this. I want to work with you on this, but I do find this is typically how I like to work. Are you okay to keep things moving faster? And you just communicate like, well, this will help us get the deal closed faster. If the occasionally, like if you can't jump on a call, I can just do it with the seller. And I won't talk about, just make it clear you're not like looking to like circumvent their commission or something. For most brokers that, especially the ones that are gatekeepers, that's like what they're mostly worried about. Um,
Sorry, what exactly are they most worried about?
I think a lot of them are worried about getting circumvented, honestly. Like that
And not getting paid out of the
does happen.
deal,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
they have a contract?
Yeah, well, you could like it depends on the seller. I have a seller right now on a $20 million transaction. There's three shareholders. I have a really good relationship with one. The other two, just because he's old and crusty, was like, I'm not going to recognize. I'll sue you to the other shareholder if you pay what the agreement that he signed
Oh,
with our
wow.
firm. So they're like pushing down the agreement. So we see a lot of, yeah, we have to deal with a lot of stuff like that. So
Yeah, I think
you
there's
start to build some scar tissue for sure. And especially brokers that aren't doing the service for their clients are more likely to be subject to that too.
Yeah. And I think there's some things there that the buyers never see and may never be aware of is
Hmm.
sort of the psychology of the role that you guys play at times, and how many times you might need to like walk your seller off the ledge, or normalize that certain things are part of the process. And yeah, I don't know if you want to speak to any of those that
Yeah,
come up.
or well, sometimes you'll have sellers too that just they are they can't stop but shoot themselves in the foot. Like they'll just change the deal structure on a whim. And then it like freaks out the buyer, or they overshare different things. Like well, for example, had a deal where the owner was fully in remission from cancer, but just had mentioned that to the seller, and he's in the medical, it's like a life sciences deal. The guy's a doctor, so he's very comfortable with just talking through the risks, I guess, of cancer. But he was basically just telling this buyer, oh, it could come back at any time, which is like statistically true, but he's like wanting to retain equity in the business for the next 10 years, run the business. There's no like worry in his plan that that's going to happen. But the
Mhm.
buyer's basically perception of it was like, oh, you're going to die in the next few years. And so it killed the deal
Oh,
because
wow.
because they were just like, I'm not like that freaks me out enough that I'm not going to do the deal. And it's like I wasn't in that conversation. And so that's like sometimes you gotta like we're sometimes there for a reason. Like it was just be like if I was in that meeting, I probably would have like, well, just reminding the client, like, this is the first time I've heard of this. You haven't really mentioned this. You're obviously motivated to keep working in the business for the next 10 years. So we have crazy stuff that happens.
Do you prefer to be in every meeting between the buyer and the seller? Like, what's your opinion on that?
If I can, I will. It depends on the client. Like to that point, like I also don't want to get in the way of the relationship for things
Mhm.
that are I like to be in the very first one. So like before the on-site, or if especially if it's like a smaller deal and we're doing the deal remotely, we probably won't travel to location to facilitate an on-site. Um, but I would like to do a video call first, get the understanding and relationship, and then yeah, at a certain point will allow. I'll try and make everything I can, but it's sometimes if it's like a time urgent thing and my calendar's full, I don't want to like stop the deal from progressing. So that's my philosophy. A lot of brokers won't, though. A lot of brokers will not let the buyer and seller meet directly,
Mhm.
ever.
Yeah,
So it depends again, knowing the broker, asking them how their process works, what they want, that type
preferences.
of thing.
And I like how you mentioned that even if the broker is trying to drive the process, but there is a request to meet outside of them, that you even if you don't agree with the process that's being run, maybe yeah, be kind and respectful, and then request to maybe make some changes to that process. I've been
Yeah, you
chatting the
gotta,
whole
yeah,
time.
I think like going around, yeah, like any fear of that, it's a good way to, you lose the deal. I think, yeah, just respecting the
Mhm.
process, even if you don't agree with it, if it seems a
Mhm.
good deal, you just have to be adaptable.
Yeah, but that comes back to like, even if you don't agree with it, but are you understanding what the process is? Comes back to asking and understanding and
Yeah.
being clear on what that process is to know that you don't agree with it, or that if you know it well, you can question it and challenge it if you know it. But if you don't know what their process is and you're just kind of following the stream of chaos, then yeah, you could end up on the wrong side of the river. Um, I've been asking all the questions so far. We've got a very quiet group today, and I told Morgan that you guys would be chatty and be jumping into things. So there's
Oh, we got a
Abby. She's
hand.
going to kick us off. Abby, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. I was wondering if you could provide just a rough breakdown between financial buyers and buyers with industry specific experience. I know you mentioned it's probably not a great idea to buy an auto shop if you don't know, what a transmission is, but in terms of buyers who have that specific experience versus buyers who, can gain that knowledge over time.
Yeah, on the smaller deals, we get a very low number of strategics, usually because they're too small to be interesting. And then oftentimes, what I've found is like I was just talking to a guy the other day who had been building IT MSP companies for a very long time. And I asked him, like, oh, would you be interested in IT? And he's like, no, I'm like leaving the industry for a reason. So, like,
Mhm.
oftentimes when it's someone who's worked in a space for a very long time, they're kind of like looking to make a change. So most of our buyers are financial buyers, and then when we are running a process on a larger deal, we will reach out to strategics typically. So that's typically how it kind of goes. Occasionally, we'll get like a strategic that comes inbound, but it's a little less likely. A lot of our buyers don't have necessarily specific industry experience, but there's like relatable skills. So like, have you run a team before?
Mhm.
Have you managed people? Like what's your like corporate track record? And I think it becomes like and like lean into the skills that would allow you that are universal skills that would be useful. And I would lean into those, even if it's not direct industry experience. I think it gets more challenging when it's like, hey, I just graduated university. My dad's going to help me buy a business.
Mhm.
And I've never managed a person in my life, but I'm going to be able to run your 50-person organization. And I look 12. Like those are like always a bit of a tougher sell too, especially with the older business owners in particular.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. And then just a quick question. Deposits, what do you see as the market standard in terms of percentage of purchase price?
Yeah, I see like oftentimes it's like around, 10%. I think like what brokers won't mention, a lot of times the deposit is pretty close to what their commission is.
Okay.
It's
And
kind of like
that
it
prevents them being circumvented, like
a
if
little
they can
bit,
just take it
yeah.
out of the deposit. Okay.
Yeah, if it's held in trust, like we have a trust account with our firm, oftentimes it's there. But yeah, usually 10% of like the deal, something like is meaningful enough, it's a refundable deposit. I also let buyers hold it in the buyer's lawyer's trust account.
Mhm.
I would not recommend having it with the seller's lawyer.
Yeah.
That would be, I would highly recommend against it because they can, you know,
Mhm.
there's like the legal right you'll have to the money, but it's actually getting the money back. And I've heard some horror stories around that too. Um, So
One,
yeah, that's typically where it is, somewhere in there. And then on bigger deals, it might be a little bit like less or no real deposit. Like as you move into the lower middle market, it's not really like a deposit thing, you know?
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
thank you. You answered my question on the deposits on the larger deals.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like less so that usually you'll have like enough. It's just such a different like financing conversation because usually the lenders are almost part of the diligence
mm,
and everything else. And so yeah.
yeah. Adam, go ahead there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, Thank you for this. I joined a bit late, so apologies if you guys covered this in the first little bit. But I've been involved in a few deals recently which have gone a little, I'd say, cold, or they've been put on the back burner, and mainly due to valuation differences between what I'm looking at and what the sellers are looking for. Deal sizes, I don't know exactly what small is considered, but sort of sub 500K in um, EBITDA, or however you want to calculate it. And I was just wondering how you've seen people successfully kind of bridge those gaps. Um, and or does time kind of come into play? It just feels like sometimes sellers who have been in, working blood sweat and tears in a business for 25, 30 years, um, even with a broker helping them, may have a different view of what the valuation should be versus someone coming in just looking at cash flow or earnings and applying a multiple. So
Yeah,
just
no,
how to bridge that gap or even approach those conversations.
yeah, it's a great question. I think when it's like there's like a certain level where if there's an asking price on the deal and you're like 50% of the asking price, then it's probably just like not going to happen. Probably. You never know. There is a tricky balance of I find a lot of buyers, especially on the main street level. So I would say 500K and below and EBITDA being in that range are hesitant to put forward offers. And maybe it's a Canadian thing. I think it is a Canadian thing of like offending the seller with below like they're like afraid to negotiate. And oftentimes I'm like I hear this from sellers all the time. Like tell them to bring an offer, and then they get all offended when the offer's low. But the like that's what the thought is. So you never really fully know. So let's just say like they want 4 or 5x or something like that, and you think it's more like three. You might as well start at three because a lot of the times the seller has talked to the broker and they want to have some room for negotiation. They're expecting price like offers not to come in at their asking price. So I always like to start with simplicity, which is just a reduced offer. And then it's like, okay, that's not going to work. They'll either give you like, we're not even going to, counter back. If they counter back at like a higher price point and the gap is above your threshold, maybe you come up a little bit. Then I start looking at deal terms. So earnouts are tricky. You can do them. I've seen them, people use them, but like sellers, it kind of their eyes glaze over. It depends on the seller and sophistication. And oftentimes like the kind of the cat's out of the bag that majority of earnouts never pay out. So if they do any research, and they've usually have a colleague or someone they know who sold their business on an earnout and they never got paid. So those can be tricky. The other way you can look at it too is like it's basically like an earnout, like forgivable seller notes. They just come across a little bit differently, presenting that. Presenting, if it's a great operator and owner, like retained equity, like sometimes they're a little bit more interested in that, like rolling over some equity and getting a payout a little bit later as some skin in the game. Like then you can start to get into those tools. But I always say like just give it a shot. I've seen sellers take tremendous discounts on purchase price because they really like the buyer. And picking lower price offers over higher ones because they like that buyer better. So I'd focus on building the really good relationship. And honestly, the best deal makers I've ever met, they don't really criticize like there's this whole like strategy of like criticizing the business in front of the business owner to try and lower the price, and it never works. It like only ever it's like going up to someone's kid and being like, your kid's pretty ugly, but sure, I'll select them for the baseball team. It's not going to go well. So I would recommend like building that relationship, and the best deal makers I met are like really good at that. Like they just basically at a certain point, like the sellers want to like sell their business to them, only them. So that can also help a lot on the price
Is there
gap.
a point where you or me the buyer would have those conversations with the actual owner versus the broker? Because the stage that I've been at has been sort of these, let's say, informal offers to try to even get close in value, but it's always been with the broker, who I'm assuming is passing all the info on, but it's not been with the seller or the actual owner. Is there a point where it might help to change that, or is the broker always the right person to have those conversations flow through?
Yeah, it can be. I find yeah, it can be tricky because you kind of want to have, at the end of the day, the broker can be your ally in getting
Yeah.
a deal pitched. It can play like they can play devil's advocate a little bit. They can like what I often do will be like, oh, you should have seen the you're kind of like, oh, I was talking to them, this is basically where they're at. You kind of play like honestly, most of the time, like a good intermediary is basically going back to the other being like, I know they're being ridiculous, but this is where they're at. And then you go back and go, oh, they're being like really tough. And then you kind of work things out. But if you are getting to a sticking point, sometimes presenting the offer in person, I wouldn't recommend it for most, and you probably want to get clearance with the broker. It depends on the client. Like it really depends on the seller. Some of them are more sophisticated and willing to negotiate. Others are very emotional, and then it will just become like it'll blow up. But that is something you can do, and maybe not the exact pricing, but just talk about like, hey, really like the business. I want to work with you, but it's not going to be an all cash offer, and here's why. And I'll work with Mr. Mrs. Broker to present that to you, but just so you can have like some expectations around that and kind of like anchor expectations a bit.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I mean, I know we're close to 1:30. I do have one follow-up, but I don't know if anyone else has a question, so we'll let someone else jump in.
Well, we are at time too. Um, I just see for those looking to join brokers buyer list. There is one
I
more
would just
I
email
mentioned.
them on the broker's buyer list. Most of them will have an email list or on their site if they do. So that often is an easier ask than asking for deals in a certain sector for them to send. Just be like, hey, can you add me to your list?
There we go. Morgan, do you have to run or do you have a hard stop?
No, I got a few extra minutes. I can do an extra 5.
Okay,
Yeah.
Adam, let's take your question and then we'll wrap it up for the day.
One thing I've noticed is I mean, I just noticed it this morning that a listing has been on a broker site for quite some time, and I just are brokers pretty good at cleaning through some of those listings,
No.
or is it possible that this thing is, done and dusted and they've just moved on?
No, the listing sites, a lot of them unfortunately are very antiquated too. So they don't really, yeah, it does happen sometimes. Yeah, not very good in general, I would say. So oftentimes they can be a bit stale. Sometimes not though. It's just unfortunately one of those things. I think Village Wealth has a pretty good, system. A lot of them will auto expire at a certain point. I actually messed up on one of those the other day where I was like, oh, I for sure thought this would have been cleared out, and sometimes they just get lost, especially as you start getting a big higher volume brokerage. Sometimes it can happen, and it's not like trying to get more buyer interest, it just sometimes happens.
Yeah. The best thing is if you can get on their internal lists and you get their email
Yeah,
notifications.
yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
ultimately we get a majority of our NDAs and most of our buyers are off of our email list now and not even the external sites. We kind of just do the external sites because you never know, but kind of one of my goals is that we can move away from even advertising there because honestly the quality of buyers is pretty poor from a lot of the listing sites, and it's gone worse, I feel, recently.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Adam and Abby, for your questions. Really appreciate everyone being here today. And so, Morgan, what's the best way to reach you, Morgan, if people want to get in touch, or would you prefer that they just inquire about listings through
They can
your
connect. Yeah, I got that list. This is my email as well. You can connect with me on LinkedIn too. Any of those options are
Fantastic.
great.
Fantastic. And if you'd like to chat with our team at Village Wealth about how we help you find and win the deal, financing, or about our subscription offerings, feel free to get in touch with Mike. He threw his calendar link there in the chat. So Mike is happy and available to chat with anyone. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and Maddie here is here with our team as well. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon and your weekends. This recording will be available. We'll send it out through email and then it will live on our YouTube channel from then onward. So, everyone, take care. Have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Morgan. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Great to see everybody.
Take care, everybody.